can we do?
Number 10, Iron Fist. So we begin our worst of 2018 with a pretty solid entry, if I do say so myself. When it comes to the worst of lists, less people voted for these in general, be it the overall nature of how people voted for things or people just wanting to focus on the stuff they liked. There was less going around with the worst of votes, but nevertheless, we managed to get enough that it kind of went past people's personal grudges and individual things such that no one person got anything on this list in and of themselves. More than one person had to vote for something in order for it to get on the worst of list. And rounding out the list at the very bottom is Iron Fist, in a spot I feel that pretty much deserves to be in, exactly where it is. Near the bottom of the worst of list, since it wasn't the worst thing to come out in the world, but still pretty lousy and worth talking about here. Iron Fist probably also gets some recognition for being most improved among the superhero TV shows from its last season. If this was season 1, it would probably be near the very top of the worst of list, but as it stands, we have a new showrunner for season 2 that has corrected some of the things that the season 1 of Iron Fist left to be desired. So Iron Fist is definitely better, but I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it is good. After all, better than bad isn't necessarily good, it just means it's less bad. And that's kind of how I feel about this season to begin with. It's better, but still not great. It still doesn't live up to the best of the Iron Fist comics, either through solo series or the Heroes for Hire stuff. That kind of really cemented the character's identity as a partner with Luke Cage. It's still pretty sloppy, all things considered. The cast really just doesn't win me over in any significant way, and on the whole, the show feels lacking in all the important aspects a good superhero show should excel in. Here's a good example from the first episode of Iron Fist. We get a pretty interesting action scene where Danny Rand punches the truck and uses his full power to just instantly incapacitate the vehicle. That's cool and the sort of thing we didn't get enough of in season 1. But then that's followed by a fight scene that really could have been in any show with any bit of action in it, not even just a superhero show. They punch, they fight. Yeah, it's not in a hallway, but rather the streets of Chinatown within New York City, but it's still not enough to really make a difference. It still feels pretty mundane. And Iron Fist doesn't use his powers again until the very end of the fight, thus making the core of this fight scene standard and boring relative to what we would expect out of a better show. And that's kind of my problem with Iron Fist and these Netflix shows in general now that the whole thing is starting to fall apart. The flaws of these series are starting to really coalesce for me, and Iron Fist is a strong example of a show really lacking any meaningful content to offer its viewers. I didn't even know this thing had come out. Netflix basically seems to have given up on a lot of these shows, effectively having dumped this one out without much marketing or fanfare whatsoever. All things considered, it's pretty lousy and pretty disappointing that this is our first outing with Iron Fist as a character. This is the sort of superhero that not a lot of people are going to be familiar with outside of the comic book world, so you want strong media adaptations to really sell people on how awesome this character can be. In that regard, Iron Fist as a show really thoroughly failed at its job. And I understand there are limitations. It would be hard to live up to the Matt Fraction comic book run, for example, with David Aja, because that sort of show would require a real budget. But I think that in and of itself is an indictment of this whole system and how they went about adapting Iron Fist as a character. If the show wasn't able to afford making good budgets and effects, though I don't understand why Netflix is so lacking in this regard relative to the CW, then perhaps Iron Fist should have never been a television show to begin with. Perhaps Netflix should have made shorter content with less episodes, or even just a movie about Iron Fist, or a series of movies about the character at the smaller local level that all these Netflix shows had been operating on with regards to Marvel characters. But they didn't do that, and it's always going to kind of bother me that the title screen of this show really advertises a television show with a look and feel far better than anything we actually get in the show proper. When your title screen is just so much better than anything the actual show has to offer, I think you're doing something wrong on such a profound level that yeah, I'm pretty glad this show was cancelled. I don't say that very lightly. A lot of people worked really hard on this thing, but it didn't come together nicely, and a lot of the cast and the characters, the way they were written, feels lacking in important ways. There's a million things I could have or would have done differently, Danny Rand's casting being a huge priority of that, but even just approaching the overall storytelling of Iron Fist. Given how New York City heavy everything is and how similar all these Netflix shows look and feel, I would have really played up differences with Iron Fist. Either using animation to tell certain stories and letting that sort of take over for action scenes or something like that, and being really clever and creative with all this stuff, or simply incorporating more of Kunlun instead of burning the city down at the first available opportunity. It's choices like these that have effectively ruined the Iron Fist series as it stands, and given what I saw in Season 2, even if the show had continued, I don't think I would have wanted to see it anymore. I didn't watch this show when it came out, and the only reason I saw any of it was in preparation for this video. I had already given up about halfway through Luke Cage's second season because honestly, these Netflix shows lack the ambition of the CW shows. They clearly didn't have a cool plan in place for the Defenders, and everything is sort of fallen apart. And now that Netflix and Disney have kind of gone their separate ways, it seems like all these shows are all but doomed to fail. If Daredevil didn't get renewed after one of its best seasons, and we might be talking about that more in the future, then what chance did Iron Fist or Luke Cage stand? Jessica Jones has another season coming out, but I feel like it's all but guaranteed that will be the last season of that show. And The Punisher feels like the last man standing, the only one that Netflix might keep around depending on how ratings go. But I have a feeling, based on what I've seen out of the trailer and what we can expect out of the show, it's not going to make a big impact on people. And I think that's the biggest problem with the Netflix shows this year. Whereas in past years, everyone was talking about the shows and their release and all this stuff in my personal life, nobody has mentioned any of this stuff at all. I don't think any of my friends or family have seen any of these new shows from Netflix in terms of these superhero stuff that came out in 2018. And that is a damning fact when we consider that I have been talking with my friends and family about a lot of other comic book shows, including some ones we'll be talking about in the best of side of things going forward. So where does that leave Netflix? Well, it's not the end of the world for them. They're still doing a lot of pretty cool stuff. I was surprised to see Titans, for example, was recently posted on Netflix here in my country because the DC streaming service that they launched evidently isn't available here. Meanwhile, Netflix is also adapting other comic book stuff, such as The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which I find really awesome. So if they want to step away from Disney's whole apparatus for now, I kind of see why. The whole thing didn't really seem to work or pay off, and people's interest seems to have greatly waned ever since Iron Fist and Defenders first appeared on the scene a couple of years ago now. After those shows came out, people just stopped talking about all these Netflix shows, and I think that was the beginning of the end for them. The really annoying and sad part about all of this, though, is that I feel like it leaves Disney in a place where they're going to be really gun-shy about going forward with any of these characters in the future. It's just hard to believe that we're going to see any adaptations of Daredevil, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, or Jessica Jones anytime soon, or even The Punisher, now that Netflix has kind of had their time with these characters and the whole thing kind of fell apart. I just don't see Disney incorporating a lot of these characters into their new streaming service or using a lot of this stuff anytime soon. They're going to wait at least a little while before they try something like this again, either in film form or in the TV show on their own network. Though I imagine the period of waiting for that is going to be a very long one. If they do adapt this stuff, there is some interesting options. For example, Kingpin would be interesting in the context of going up against the MCU Spider-Man. And now that there aren't these TV shows to worry about, that sort of thing is a lot more possible going forward. Does it mean that I think we're going to be seeing Charlie Cox have a run-in with Tom Holland's Spider-Man in some sort of future Spider-Man film? I doubt it, but that would be really cool. And at least that option is on the table. Kevin Feige is a pretty smart guy and would be the kind of person to do something awesome like that. However, I feel his current focus is on incorporating the new X-Men and Fantastic Four characters that he's gotten access to for the first time ever. So, with that, we're going to have to say goodbye to the idea of any future Iron Fist adaptation for some time. It was disappointing, dreadful, and getting through the second season was honestly torturous. So the whole thing feels pretty disappointing, and that is a pretty strong start to our worst of list. Next up, we're going to flip back over to the best of with a really awesome movie, and when we return to the worst of list, we're going to be getting into a comic book miniseries that I was surprised to see found its way here, yet I'm looking forward to talking about just the same. So stay tuned for that. If you like Comic Island, be sure to support our Patreon page, the link to which you can find in the video description below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.